guest wouldn't look out of place in films like The Godfather and Goodfellas?
Michael Franzese was once part of one of New York's most violent and feared crime families, was even ranked 18th on a list of most wealthy and powerful mafia bosses in the world, and I think there's only 2 of them still alive.
Yes. However, after Michael did the unthinkable and quit the mob in 1995, he found himself facing years with a life-threatening target on his back.
Now, more than 25 years on, he's finally able to tell his story. It is an incredible story. Michael joins us now. We met him in the commercial break, and I've got to say, he speaks exactly like I wanted him to. It's just that, I mean, you have got the voice.
You've got the voice.
Well, Phil, I got to tell you this. I was listening to you off stage.
I told you he would be.
You got the Vito Corleone down pretty good.
Is it okay? Right, so let's talk about you and your story, because this is extraordinary. There were 5... when you were growing up, 5 major families in New York City. And this was part of your family, your grandfather, your father. So explain the role, your role, their role within these families.
My grandfather immigrated from Naples and came to New York, and he wasn't part of the life, but he was an associate, never wanted to be, intimately involved. My father, on the other hand, he started young, and he was one of the youngest guys to ever be made. And in our terminology, that means take the oath and become a made member of that life. So my father was in it early. Originally, he didn't want that life for me. He wanted me to go to school, be a doctor. But in the 1960s, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison for a federal case that he was convicted of. I was a student in school at that point, but I figured my dad was going to die in jail. And Joe Colombo, who was the boss of our family, my dad was his underboss, second in command. So I was very close to him. And, a lot of my dad's friends saying, if you don't help your father out, he's going to die in prison. So my dad and I met in the visiting room, Leavenworth Penitentiary. And I said, Dad, I'm not going to school. If I don't help you out, you're going to die in here. And he was a little upset about it because he wanted me to really, stay off the street. But he knew my mind was made up. And that's when he proposed me for membership in that life. Because when you get into the life, you can't just say, hey, I want to join. Somebody has to propose you, vouch for you, say you have what it takes. In my case, it was my dad.
And that's not an easy thing to happen, is it? As you say, that took you 3 years, is that right, to become an official member?
Yeah, I was a recruit for about 3 years, where I had to prove myself worthy.
And what does that entail? How does that look?
Well, there's a lot of discipline in that life, a lot of authority. You got to do what you're told. And look, I'm going to be honest with you. I try to be as honest as I can. A lot of menial things, drive the boss around, do things like that. But, the life is violent at times. If you're part of that life, you see the violence.
Well, you worked your way up to captain. That meant you were in charge of about 300 soldiers. So the sort of terminology at that stage. And you're being honest. Were there people who yours was the last face they saw?
Well, let me put it this way. It's part of the life. And if you're part of that life, you're part of the violence. And I don't know if I might have been that last person, but I've certainly seen my share of things like that happen.
And is it like... I hesitate to say the movies, but you do hear people who professionally, or soldiers, or whoever, who have been involved in that, and they see every face of those that are no longer here, perhaps because of them. Do you remember all of those people?
Yeah, you know what, Phil? I think there's 2 kind of people in that life. I'm going to be honest. There's some people there that seem to really get into that, enjoy it. Maybe that's not the right word, but they get into it. They're street guys. They were born and raised that way. And others, you got to do what you're told, and sometimes you maybe just step outside of yourself and you handle things. You don't necessarily feel good about it. It's not something you want to do. And I want to make something clear, too. A lot of people think from the moment you come into that life, it's all about violence and murder, and it's not about that. I mean, we're business-minded people. We try to do things a little bit differently, and not everybody is a thug on the street trying to do things like that. There are those guys, obviously, but it's not everybody.
So it took you 3 years, as you say, to sort of become accepted into that family. But it wasn't too long before you really saw yourself starting to make serious money, right?
Yeah, Rochelle, you know, I was motivated to do two things. I wanted to get my dad out of prison, and I did get him out after 10 years. He ended up doing 40 years on that 50. And I was fortunate. I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business. I was very aggressive on the street. I worked 7 days a week. I brought new things into the family that they hadn't done before, and went on to make a very serious amount of money. And in that life, money is power. And if you're making money and you're earning good for the family, you rise in the ranks.
Well, you were making tens of millions of dollars a week because you had fuel scams. There were all sorts of things that you were doing that the family, the business was involved in. That's a hell of a lot of money. Eventually, the law caught up with you.
Yes.
You were arrested. You had early release on probation. Then you went back in again. And it was in prison that you made that decision. Now, when you read anything, you know, of us, all we see about the Mafia, really, thankfully, is from the movies. You never get out. Nobody gets out. We were talking about that list of the top 50 published in Fortune magazine, the top 50 Mafia bosses of all time, top earners. You were number 18.
Yes.
And there's one guy in prison, and there's you, and everyone else is dead.
Yes.
How do you decide to get out and live?
Well, let me tell you, Phil, there's no blueprint for walking away from that life and surviving. And, you know, I didn't know how it was going to turn out because I never sell my former associates short. They're very capable. But I'll tell you what happened. I met a young girl who's now my wife of 37 years, who was a young girl of faith. And when I met her, I fell in love with her. And I said, one of two things are going to happen. If I marry this girl and stay in her life, eventually she's going to end up without me. Because I had such a bullseye on my back. My name was very big. Government really wanted to put me in prison. So I said, either I stay with her or I'm in the life. And so I decided to try to walk away. I had a plan. It didn't work out exactly the way I wanted it to, but here I am, 30 some odd years later. I'm alive and I'm free.
Well, you had kids, though. You had kids, and you were told by law enforcement agencies, you've got to get out of town.
Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't an easy walk away. You did, as you said, have a target on your back.
Well, I'll tell you what I did. I moved out of New York. I would have never made it in New York. I moved out to the West Coast. And I'll tell you what happened, Phil. Everybody, and I mean everybody that I know, started to get in trouble with these racketeering laws. And so people thought I was going to become a witness because normally nobody gets out of that life without testifying, working with the government.
Right.
That's not what I was about. I don't want to put people in prison. I never put anybody away. I just wanted out of the life. And eventually, when people understood I wasn't looking to hurt anybody, they had their own troubles. So they were trying to defend themselves, and they kind of forgot about me a little bit. And then before I knew it, everybody I know, everybody, either dead or in prison for the rest of their life. Everybody. So, for me, I'll be honest with you, I'm a person of faith. I believe God had a different plan and a purpose for me. And I never thought I was ever going to be speaking, but I was recruited out of prison by the very people that tried to put me there, the FBI. And I had a big gambling operation on the street. We had a lot of athletes gambling with us. So they came to me and they said, hey, we got a problem in pro sports and college sports. Will you help us out? Keep these athletes straight. And so I started working with them when I got out of prison. And I've been speaking for the last almost 25 years now, all over the world.
Obviously, your life has moved, in, like you say, a completely different direction. You met a lovely woman, you fell in love, you start a family, you've turned your life around. Like, it's crazy. This, to me, obviously, that life that you used to live seems so far-fetched, so out of the ordinary for most people to sort of comprehend. What does that sort of life do for you mentally? Ducking and diving, watching your back, you've got a threat on you. What does that do to your mind?
Well, still today, even though I don't live in fear, honestly, but if I go to New York, I'm very careful. I'm always looking back. I'm very conscious of my surroundings. It's just natural. It's instinct, Because, look, there was one night, one of the horrors of that life is that you're in trouble, you don't know it. Your best friend walks you into a room, you don't walk out again. And I had that experience one night when I was walking into a room and I didn't know if I was going to walk out. And honestly, people have said to me, well, why didn't you cut and run? And it wasn't heroic, it was robotic. I just said, hey, if this is it, this is it. I was so much a product of that life. That's what it does to you. And, but obviously I'm here, so I mean, it worked out. But, you know, I want to make this point. I call that life an evil life. And I want to be clear on that. I'm not calling the guys evil. It wouldn't be right. I was one of them. I just happen to be very blessed. But I don't know any family of any member of that life, including my own, and not my wife and kids, but my brother, sister, mother, father, that haven't been totally devastated.
Yeah.
And that's true of every family, of every member. So any lifestyle that does that to a family obviously is a bad life.
It's still going on. Still happening?
Still going on. It's not like it was the golden years of that life, Cosa Nostra Mafia in New York, the 50s through the mid-80s, when they started using the racketeering laws very effective. It still exists. I don't think it'll go away in my lifetime, but it's not like it was before.
Well, you say that you are doing talks and you do put yourself out there, and that's exactly what you're doing, because you could, if you wanted to, as you see, you know, this is the tip of the iceberg, how fascinating it is. An evening with Michael Franzese is the real good fella. It's at the Grosvenor House on the 2nd of July. A fascinating evening that will be. Did you get to keep the money?
You know, people are always asking me all the time, where's all your money? I want to tell you this. You know, they say I got hundreds of millions of dollars buried. If it's out there, I doubt I'll ever get to use it, Phil, but let's just leave it at that. But, you know, I want to say this. I'm very excited about coming here. I think we're going to do close to 25 cities. I met a guy here, this fella Kaz with Mandela Ventures, and just a wonderful group of people that made me very, very comfortable. And I'm going to be telling some things that I haven't spoke about in the past. I really mean that. And I think people are going to get an eye-opening experience when they hear some of the things, because people think they know about the Mafia and Cosa Nostra, but they don't really know. But when I'm finished, they'll know.
Well, do stay safe. Be careful what you say.
Yes.
2nd of July, as we said, at Grosvenor House. Pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
I could have done that all day.
Yeah.
Like, they're like, we're over them. I've got so much more to ask.
To hell with that. We're carrying on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.